Hey folks, it's Ardwulf. Welcome. Today is Traveller Tuesday. I've been promising a Traveller Tuesday video for quite a while, and here we go. There's a number of new products from Mongoose Publishing that are coming out or have come out recently that I will be giving you a look at as soon as I get the videos done. But today we are going to have a look at a new product from Mongoose Publishing written by Shannon Appelcline, who is one of the foremost RPG hobby historians. The book is called This is Free Trader Beowulf. It is not a supplement for Traveller. It is a book about the history of Traveller as a game and as a series of publications. And Shannon has gone very deep into the weeds on this. For those who don't want to watch the entire video, the book's good, go buy it. But I am reasonably pleased with it. I do have a couple of little nitpicky things that I will mention as we go. Now, the format here is not like a standard US-sized hardcover book. It's going to be either like landscape. I'm not sure if it's landscape or if it's going to be like a coffee table book or whatever. I won't know until the physical book arrives. I may do a video on that when it comes out. In the meantime, we have the PDF, and I have read the entire thing, and I am very pleased with it. One thing that I will complain about is the bookmarks. The bookmarks suck. There's inexplicably a random bookmark leading to Traveller the New Era, and some garbage bookmarks. Do better at this, Mongoose. Everybody should be trying to do better at bookmarks in their PDFs. But this is the cover. It's a very handsome cover. Free Trader Beowulf, of course, harkens back to the cover of the original classic Traveller. Now, those of us who are into Traveller at all, are sort of aware of it, will know that Traveller originated in 1977 from Game Designers Workshop and currently resides with two companies. One is Mongoose Publishing, publisher of a very large line of Mongoose Traveller second edition stuff at the moment. And Far Future Enterprises, which is basically Mark Miller, the original designer of Traveller. And there's some really interesting things that are buried in here. I learned some stuff reading this book. Yes, I knew the broad scope of it already, but there were some gaps in that knowledge that I was not previously aware of. And there's some interesting tidbits that I didn't know. And this has in it, alongside all the history and stuff, checklists for all the Traveller, not all the Traveller stuff maybe, but a lot of Traveller products. So you can use this book as like a working checklist if you're collecting Traveller or something like that. It is superb. I love it. Now, the framing on the video here is a little weird because of the sort of off format. I was set up to do portrait scale and not landscape scale or whatever this is. But we have author Shannon Appelcline, editor Matthew Sprange, who's the lead fella over at Mongoose, proofreading by Charlotte Law, graphic design and art direction by Sandrine Tarak. Hopefully I'm not mangling that too bad. And illustrations by Quentin Sobrouillard. I may be massacring that as well. I apologize, Quentin, if that is the case. And special thanks, of course, to Mark Miller. Now, I'll point out that Shannon Appelcline is the author of the multi-volume work called Designers and Dragons. I believe he is working on a new edition of that. That is very highly recommended. Also, that is a sort of system-based or publisher by publisher history of RPGs. Up to about the early 2000s or maybe the late 90s or something like that. And I can't wait to see the update. I have the originals, and I think they're out of print right now. You can get them electronically, though, and I think they may be available through DriveThruRPG as well. So let's take a quick look at the dedication, which is to a whole bunch of folks who are no longer with us. Including Bob Bledsaw, one of the founders of Judges Guild, Andrew Bolton, who is a Traveller CGI artist, Jesse DeGraff, who I'm not sure I even realized that Jesse had passed away, the late John Ford, of course, Keith Fry, who founded TravellerCon, Hunter Gordon, who was the head fella at QuickLink Interactive, Janelle Jaquays, who did some really original, really early formative stuff for Traveller, J. Andrew Keith, half of the Keith brothers that contributed so much to Traveller, Carrie Lloyd. I'm not sure I knew that Carrie Lloyd was no longer with us. Jim Ward, who did some Traveller stuff back in the day, who just passed away relatively recently. Lauren Wiseman, of course, who was also one of the founders of Game Designers Workshop. And, of course, there's the dedication to Dave Arnson and Gary Gygax, who started the role-playing hobby in the first place. So table of contents. The book actually starts before Traveller with its early inspirations. Clearly Shannon conducted some interviews with Mark to find out some of the early inspirations and some of the details of how Game Designers Workshop was founded. There is some wargaming conversation in this section specifically as well. And a little bit later when we start to get into Traveller war games. It talks about the foundation of GDW and what they were into, right at the beginning. And each chapter ends with a checklist of the stuff that they did for Traveller in that time period. So if we I don't want to make this a flip through. You can consider this a review because I've read the whole book already. So before the game, 1973 to 1977, it talks about, they played the pants off at E-Day back in the day, like all those folks did if they were around at the time. Many of the inspirations, this awesome Games Workshop sign that they had, which looks very beat up, early sci-fi efforts from either Conflict Games or Game Designers Workshop, who later bought Conflict Games, including Triplanetary and the original Imperium. There's some stuff about that original Imperium that I'm not sure that I knew. The Traveller major races originated in an earlier version of Imperium that was a very different game than what we got. The game we got is really good, but I'd have been curious to see that original game too. We do also talk about, I'll get into that in a minute, Belter, and Blood Tree Rebellion, neither of which were officially Traveller stuff, but boy, they're really adjacent to Traveller. There's a discussion here of how the Game Designers Workshop folks reacted to the introduction of role-playing. We get a conversation about On Guard, which was their first RPG, which is a very interesting RPG. We have these little sidebars of view from the industry to kind of give you a little more context of what's going on in role-playing in this particular time period that is being talked about. I think other than Triplanetary, which I used to own, I think I have all of the GDW sci-fi games, and I definitely have all the Traveller ones. Here's the Little Black Books era from 76 to 79. There were Little Black Books published after that, but the book talks about that. Here's an image of the late Lauren Wiseman, unfortunately. Early science fiction role-playing. These are the games that preceded Traveller in the science fiction RPG space. There aren't many of them, and none of them were as formative or as influential as Traveller. One of those is James Ward's Metamorphosis Alpha. We also have Space Patrol and Space Quest. These are super duper small press things, obviously. It talks about, why did Mark pick the name Traveller? That's a whole thing going on here. Here's a cool image from what I take to be an early Origins. I wish there were better descriptive text on some of the images, with Rich Banner, Frank Chadwick, and a bearded Mark Miller. Here's Mark's White Dwarf interview, little picture of him right there. Industry snapshot. Here's I'm not sure who this is. Is this Mark? It could be Mark. I'm not sure. We're talking about the little black books. These are other RPGs that GDW considered at some point, a couple of which are non-science fiction adaptations of the Traveller. Where the book really gets, I knew a lot of this early stuff, but not all of it. There's some really interesting tidbits in here. For example, the very first Traveller play that occurred when it was in playtest was actually not run by Mark. It was actually being run by Frank Chadwick, and Mark was observing and taking notes, which I found very interesting. We may also recall that what is now thought of as the official Traveller universe didn't really exist in the very early days of Traveller for the first range of books. It was assumed, kind of no questions asked, and this was an industry-wide assumption, by the way, that people would want to create their own setting materials, and that turned out to be a mistaken conclusion. GDW figured that out as well and slowly developed to the Third Imperium setting as they continued to put products out. At one point, they were selling 1 million Traveller products a year in the very early 80s, which is an amazing number. That's across the whole line. That's not the core rules, but still, it's still an amazing number. There's extensive discussion of all of the Traveller licensees from the early days of Classic Traveller, where we got Game Lords and Judges Guild and stuff like that, to the much later days where we have Comstar and Quick Interactive and Avenger Enterprises. And Shannon does a great job here of kind of untangling some of this very tangled history, particularly that I didn't know in like the D20 Traveller era. GDW had this neat idea where they would issue a licensee, and it was historically, it's been very easy to deal with Traveller from a licensing standpoint. If you're a licensee, GDW is easy to work with. Mark today is incredibly easy to work with if you want to be a Traveller licensee, in addition to like the fan content programs that Mongoose is doing. But GDW had this idea that they were going to do land grants where they would say, okay, Judges Guild, you're going to have these 4 sectors over here: Lay, Maranatha, Alcahest, Glimmerdiff for Reaches, and Crucis Margin. Now, those have been decanonized because, frankly, the quality of Judges Guild material period was irregular. They did some really good stuff, and they did some stuff that was not as good. And unfortunately, the sector books, all of which I have, were not as good as one would otherwise have hoped. This map shows us who got the land grants, and that was later as well. Here's an image of Chaosium's Thieves World, which, because Traveller was really popular at the time, included stats for Traveller. We've got discussion of the Paranoia Press stuff, which was also some really interesting stuff. There's a lot of talk about the Keith brothers, J. Andrew Keith and William H. Keith Jr., who as both writers and artists contributed hugely to Traveller in the classic era and even later on as well. The next chapter here, we have our checklists, the next chapter, and we do have references here, so you can look this stuff up. There are no footnotes, but Shannon is good, did think to provide references for where he got all this information. And there's a lot of information here. This is 1982 to 1987, where GDW is transitioning from the little black books into the larger portrait-sized full color books, which they did for the last several years. There was a general economic downturn at the time, and a RPG industry specific downturn at the time, which really hurt GDW. And a lot of that GDW background that's not necessarily Traveller specific is in here. We also have a discussion of the foreign language adaptations of Traveller, which included a Japanese version, there was a German version, and there's a Spanish version. And let me tell you, that Spanish version by Diseños Orbitales, I've got it. It's an amazing, gorgeous book. And it actually appeared, even though it's a classic Traveller translation, it appeared in the MegaTraveller era, and we'll get to MegaTraveller too. We talk about the Journal of the Traveller's Aid Society, its transformation into Challenge Magazine, DGP, that's Digest Group Publications, and Seeker Publications get their own land grants and licenses and all that stuff. They're both more important as we begin to transition into the MegaTraveller era, which this book, of course, discusses as well. And here's some images of the Traveller Digest. I've got a few issues of Traveller Digest. Great magazine. Once again, checklist and references. Here we have 87 to 92, the MegaTraveller era. And we get, again, sidebars in every one of these chapters about what else is going on outside of Traveller. We also get these cool maps. So here's a map of the Spinward Marches, and here's all the adventures that were run down wherever they appeared and where they show up on these maps for this particular era. And there's a bunch of these throughout the book. This is a tremendous resource, honestly, not just for people interested in the history of the system, but like regular Traveller referees who say, hey, I am running in the Spinward Marches in the Rebellion era. What adventures are available to me and where can they be found? Here you go. And again, there's a bunch of these. Now, you're not getting stat blocks or anything like that in this book, but even from that standpoint, I felt like this was an immensely valuable book. Again, more discussion of digest groups. A lot of these discussions of companies or licensees have sidebars in them about planned products that never appeared. There's a lot of these. Some of these are really awesome sounding things, too. It talks about the video games, which were not particularly successful. The Jordani Conspiracy and Quest for the Ancients. Talks about Chuck Gannon kind of taking over sort of 2/3 of the way through the MegaTraveller era and bringing his own vision. And then none of that vision was implemented beyond the first book, which was Hard Times, which is one of the only MegaTraveller things that GDW did that I don't have. The other interesting thing is that a lot of the work, regardless of whether it was published by GDW or by Digest Group for MegaTraveller, was done by Digest Group. And that kind of contributed to GDW's later decision to transform Traveller into something that used their house system with Traveller the New Era, because nobody was really into the system anymore, and they didn't feel that was working for GDW, and they didn't feel like they had complete control over it. Here's a whole chapter on the history of the Imperium Working Group, which is like this online collaborative of intrepid folks and creators who fleshed out a lot of the background of the Third Imperium setting. There's just so much information on here, and it's all very well researched. It is, we do have the references, we have checklists. This is just an enormously valuable book, even aside from its value as history, for people who are very into Traveller. For somebody new to Traveller, I wouldn't necessarily recommend this book, but 20 years from now, they might find out that they wanted it and it is going for $1 million. So who knows? Here's the Traveller, the New Era, which was made a big splash at the time, and it was a beautifully produced book, and nonetheless, because of the change in system and because it functionally destroyed the existing Traveller universe that people were very attached to, the hardcore fans had a pretty negative reaction to it. I think there's a lot to like in Traveller, the New Era, but as like a platform for doing Traveller, it would not be my choice today. Fire Fusion and Steel was another one of those kind of brilliant things that they did, actually. Talks about Dangerous Journeys, published by GDW, a fantasy RPG by Gary Gygax, which I was super into at the time and still have all my stuff, and how that impacted Game Designers Workshop. Contrary to popular opinion, it didn't directly cause that whole situation where they got sued by TSR. You will have an even lower opinion of Lorraine Williams when you've read this book, that even if you don't have a low opinion of her already. But while GDW got paid for their inventory and the rights and all that stuff, so they didn't actually get billed at the end, the resolution of it cost GDW enormous time and effort. And that certainly had an impact on the later decision to dissolve the company. But, the story of Traveller, somewhat miraculously, does not end with Game Designers Workshop, right? We're about to get into GDW has gone away, and the rights to Traveller have now, based on the original agreement that was made with the founders of Game Designers Workshop, all of their IPs passed to their original creators. So Frank Chadwick got Frank stuff, and Mark Miller got Mark stuff, and other folks got their stuff. And a couple of those things had gotten peeled off prior to that, like Europa. But very shortly after, GDW folds, and they did not declare bankruptcy. They shut the doors and paid all the bills and distributed all the IPs. It was a very, I'm sure, anguished but clean cessation of operations. Very shortly thereafter, Mark made a licensing deal with a company that ended up being called Imperium Games. This is very complicated and involves a Hollywood production company and all kinds of other stuff. All that's in here. Ken Whitman is involved. Don't get us started on that. It talks about the reasons why the T4 line was so sloppy. It talks about, the degree to which Mark was personally involved in this. Again, we have an industry sidebar. It really, I feel like this is a different kind of video than it would be if I were doing the standard Traveller Tuesday flip through. Let me put it that way. Here's Imperium collapsing. Here's the list of the T4 books that could have come out that didn't. Here's a list of the T4 books that did. I have a pretty close to full set of this stuff. I think I'm missing a couple of things. The unfinished stuff that they did, and they were at the very end. Mark was personally working on a Traveller 4.1, which eventually, over the span of a long time, metamorphosed into what is now Traveller 5. And I actually feel like this book has given me a slightly modified perspective on Traveller 5, which I am now willing to, I think, cut a little more slack than I was previously cutting, because I kind of get where Mark was coming from now when he was creating it. Here's what Shannon calls appropriately the Long Night, which is the period in which Traveller proper, meaning Traveller, the Traveller system, did not really have a home. But it did have sort of a home with companies like Steve Jackson Games and the folks that did the Traveller D20 stuff. That again is a situation that was very complicated, where you've got three kind of main parties involved, which is QuickLink Interactive and Comstar Enterprises and Avenger Enterprises, all doing stuff for Traveller D20. It's easy to have missed. They did a lot of material for Traveller D20, even though it was not embraced by Traveller fandom. Let me put it that way. Again, what some people might take as cutesy, but I take as I take it as thematically appropriate. Imperium Eternal, which is what Shannon calls the Steve Jackson Games era of GURPS Traveller. Now, I have all that product as well, and despite not liking the GURPS system as a foundation for playing Traveller, these books are all really high quality, and with the possible exception of Behind the Claw, which was but it talks about that too. Apparently they printed a draft instead of the corrected draft, so that's why that went away. Here's the undone Steve Jackson Games stuff. I've got what I believe to be a complete set of GURPS Traveller product. And again, we're talking about Marischal supplements. There's still some licensees in this period. Here's the adventure maps of the adventures that are set in the Gateway sector and Limited for Reaches. Quick links, expected expansion. A lot of the issues with Quick Link were related to Hunter Gordon's health. And he eventually passed away from, I believe, lung cancer. That's discussed in here as well. Martin Doherty emerges in this era as well as a really important author, which he remains to this day. Traveller Hero, which is the only Traveller rule set that I don't own. It talks about miniatures, the Martian metals, and other miniatures that were produced for Traveller. Other publishers doing stuff in this period. There's just such an enormous amount of information in here. Now, this is interesting right here. There's this kind of timeline for what Shannon calls the long night, and this is awesome, but we don't have this for the other chapters, and I'm not sure why. We also have discussions of resources like Freelance Traveller, the magazine that is still being published to this day, electronic magazine, well worth your time to be up to speed on that. And Traveller Map, which is an amazing, a unique, and incredibly powerful resource for Traveller or really any science fiction RPG. Next up, we get the Mongoose era. This is kind of going to be the end of the book. There's 2 chapters here, but the Mongoose period, where Mongoose acquires a license to do Traveller, and Mongoose gets hit hard with some stuff they're trying to do that are kind of economic problems that are beyond their immediate control. It talks about some of the internal struggles that Mongoose had and how they managed to come back out of that. Remember that Mongoose Publishing started as a publisher, sort of jumping on the D20 bandwagon when that hit really big. And they're one of the very few of those publishers who still survive today, in part because of things like Traveller. They were not 100% dependent on that D20 D&D stuff. It talks about impact of the OGL on Traveller. There's just so much information here. Science fiction role-playing in the 21st century. This is, all the way up to 2017, including a bunch of the space D&D games that are somewhat popular nowadays. The third Imperium material, like Mongoose, like GDW, actually didn't really want to do much official Traveller Universe stuff at first, but there was demand for that, right? For obvious reasons. So they released a quite extensive line of official Traveller Universe material. Here's Mongoose Traveller First Edition Adventures. Just to say this, compatibility between any version of Traveller that uses a Traveller rule set as opposed to Traveller the New Era or GURPS or whatever, cross compatibility is still really high. You could easily take the Mongoose First Edition adventures and run them in second edition and just do the conversions on the fly. And that's even true of like Classic Traveller and MegaTraveller, although you may have to do more to make modifications to things like vehicles and stuff. You may need to refresh the stat blocks on the stuff like that. Mongoose Traveller First Edition books that they were going to do but didn't get to. Happy to report that Traveller seems very healthy at Mongoose right now, and I am generally very happy with the materials. I have complaints about the Mongoose materials that they're doing right now, but, overall, I am generally really pleased with what Mongoose is doing in the direction that they're taking. I just wish they would bring product. In a sense, I wish they would bring product out faster, but in a sense, I'm glad they don't because it would cost me more money. So the last chapter is FFE T5 and Beyond. This is the story of Far Future Enterprises, the company that is run by Mark Miller that currently holds the rights to the Traveller IP. And it talks about Traveller 5 as well and some of the background, which I didn't know of, what was the design intent for Traveller 5. I feel like that information actually ought to have been in the books. And it turns my opinion of Traveller 5, although it's still a very difficult piece of work to use. I think the real Traveller diehards and the people who want more resources for Traveller, for whatever Traveller they're using, probably do want Traveller 5 because it's got things like a system for making armor and guns and robots and alien races, which has never appeared in an official Traveller product before, and a general equipment plus stuff for vehicles and starships. So there is a product line supporting Traveller 5, but ultimately Traveller 5, all the different versions of Traveller, whether it's Classic Traveller or MegaTraveller or Traveller 5 or either Mongoose Traveller, all kind of support each other, right? We've got this enormous history of stuff to draw upon, of material about the world and adventures and stuff like that. And again, as long as we leave out New Era and that kind of thing, game systems that didn't use the Traveller game system, cross compatibility and conversion is really easy. If this stuff, in case what could have been, I think, stuff that we might end up still seeing. This T8 thing is awesome. Mark's grandson wants to play Traveller by going off and playing all the design sequences, and Mark was talking about doing like a kid's version of Traveller with little things to color in. That sounds awesome. I would buy that. Come on. I'm not 8 years old. I'm well over 8 years old. Thank you very much. The novels are all discussed here. Again, we're not going to get into all that information. The novels are all discussed. There's actually been more Traveller novels than you might be aware of, both official and unofficial. All of them are mentioned in here. And here's the Traveller Ascension board game, which I had demoed for me at an Origins a few years ago, but I have not picked up. And then, of course, here's the beautiful 3-volume slipcase set of Traveller 5. I've done some video on that. I have warmed up a bit on Traveller 5. I still wouldn't use it as my main foundation for running Traveller, but I would absolutely use it as a supplement to whatever foundation for Traveller I choose to use, which is these days tends to be Mongoose Traveller 2nd edition, which I'm very happy with. And here's the actual last chapter, 2015 to the present. This is Mongoose emerging from their problems and establishing the 2nd edition with partnership from Studio 2 as their sort of publication agent. I'm not sure or fulfillment house. They handle the printing and warehousing and shipment and all that stuff, leaving Mongoose free to do the design work. I'm not sure I had seen that information. I sort of knew that, but I'm not sure I had seen the information about exactly who's doing what. And once again, we have the Trojan Reach, which has gotten just tons of attention in the Mongoose Traveller era. It is at this point as well developed as the Spinward Marches. Plus, we have to support it, we have Pirates of Drenax, which is, in my opinion, one of the 3 best RPG campaigns ever published. Role-playing in 2022. It is now 2024, but here you go. Here's Mongoose Publishing Charted Space. Mongoose has busted their humps trying to give us sector books on as much as possible. And this chart shows what they have produced so far. And whatever else Mongoose would like to do, bring it, we'll buy it. So I like the term Revival Vengeance, by the way, and because it harkens back to the Arrival Vengeance adventure from MegaTraveller, one of the late MegaTraveller things. You get a real sense here of why whoever the publisher was at the time was suffering from whatever challenges they were facing at the time. We've got a beautiful back cover here. That's not actually the back cover. That's just like the end page. And there's some stuff about other resources that you might look at, which do include Designers and Dragons. Hopefully Shannon will bring us an updated version of that tomorrow. Would be fantastic, but I don't think it'll be quite that soon. And other resources, the magazine indices, which include this website, which is enormously useful, by the way, if you're looking for this magazine content. And remember that in addition to like professionally printed magazines, there were tons of zines and electronic periodicals and stuff like that. The magazine support for Traveller over its history has been just amazing. And here's the actual back cover. We see the logos here, Mongoose, Studio 2, and Designers and Dragons. So overall impressions are overwhelmingly positive. I would have preferred to have seen footnotes, I think, directing us to specific pieces of information rather than just references at the ends of the chapters. That's a very minor complaint. I certainly would hope that Mongoose will come in and update the PDF with better bookmarks, because the bookmarks right now are not useful at all. Other than that, I found this incredibly there are a few typos in the book, just so you know. I didn't find anything that confused me, but we've got this mystery XX right here at the bottom. That's a typo, right? So there are some typos and stuff like that I'm guessing Mongoose will update the PDF to fix all those things. Very pleased with the book overall. Have really nothing I have no like huge complaints about it. I really can't wait to see what the physical book looks like, because it is a $60 book. If you do buy it through Mongoose, you get the PDF for free. And that's typically how I buy this stuff because of that, because I always want the PDFs. Because when I read this stuff, chances are I'm reading the PDF. I'm not sure if this will be a coffee table book or a landscape book or whatever. There's precedent for landscape books. The Far Future Enterprises landscape format books are discussed in here as well. I think I might be missing one of those. And they're worth a large chunk of money now, so I'm probably not filling that particular gap. But there's always Noble Knight Games, so if anybody's going to get it, it's going to be them. So once again, thanks for watching. Hopefully this has been useful. And this is, if you're on the edge of whether you want to buy this or not, this is giving you a sense of what's in the book. Lots of information in here. I don't feel that it will necessarily be useful to everybody who likes Traveller, but it will be very useful for people running Traveller because of the lists of adventures that are presented in a very easy way to kind of digest, and you can then run those products down. Folks who, just want to know the very complicated history of this enduringly popular and somewhat miraculously still surviving game system.
Massive thanks to the patrons of Ardwulf's Lair, whose support and encouragement make what we do at Ardwulf's Lair possible. Thank you, patrons. Links to help support the channel are in the video description, so check out the Patreon, the Ko-Fi, and the merch store, where you can get snazzy Ardwulf's Lair t-shirts, drinking vessels, and other cool swag. There is also an affiliate link for Noble Knight Games in the video description. If you buy stuff through that affiliate link, it helps us support the channel with Noble Knight store credit. Thank you, Noble Knight. Until next time, thanks for watching, and happy gaming.